Okay.
Thank you, Madhav. Thank you, Sudhir. Our invited guest, Dr. Nikhil Jakatdar, had joined. So I'll request Dr. Vijay Tare to invite him and introduce him and request him to speak. Dr. Vijay Tare ji, please take over.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anandji. Welcome, Nikhil. Really appreciate you joining us at a very short notice. And just to give the entire team about some background about Nikhil. Nikhil is a serial entrepreneur and a very successful entrepreneur. He has 3 exits to his name, and he is now running his 4th venture. He started his first venture while he was doing his PhD at UC Berkeley. He is also COEP alumnus, and he has founded and exited companies like Timber Technologies, Visagas, and ViewClip. So recently, so a lot of you might be knowing about ViewClip. So he was that was that was one of his venture which he exited. And over last couple of years, he has started a new venture which is into the molecular diagnostics, which is GenPad Diagnostics. And we are also, just to give you a glimpse of how Nikhil is, he has almost 51 patents to his name. Okay. So Nikhil, welcome to this session, and we would really love to hear all our startups who are part of this cohort would love to hear your startup journey, some of the challenges, how did you overcome them, and some tips to our startups to be successful in their startup journey. Nikhil, if you can put your video on.
No, my video is on. His video is on.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't see it. So
yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So Nikhil, thank you again, and really appreciate you joining this session.
Can I just say a few words?
Sure.
Dr. Nikhil and I have been connected for quite some time, and he is a great supporter of Garje Marathi. I would like to tell him a little bit about our Garje Marathi Innovation Academy. We started this about 2 years back, but the Innovation Academy's actual impact has been created by Sudhir Kadam and Alankar Joshi and his team, wherein we started mentoring early stage startups. And for this, right now, for this meeting, there are early stage startups acceleration program. There are all those 10 startups are there. So they all want to listen to you about your journey and learn from your experience and get inspired. Please, over to you, Dr. Nikhil.
Yeah, thank you, Anand. Thank you, Vijay, and Sudhir. Good to see you. It's been a long time.
Everybody knows Sudhir.
Sudhir is the person, how when you say Barack, nobody has to say Obama. Same way. When you say Sudhir, nobody has to say Kadam. Exactly.
I'm flattered, Nikhil. I'm flattered.
So, in any case, thank you for having me. I think many of these conversations, at least I find them a little bit boring if I just talk and there isn't much interaction. You have heard enough and more stories from very, very successful people. So mine in that sense will be just one more story. What will really make it interesting is if there are specific questions or things that have been on people's minds, then I can try and, tell the story with that as the angle. Otherwise, the same story can be told in so many different ways, right? Whether it's the focus on what it took to go from a concept to a product. So a more product-centric story, a more commercial side of the story, how you actually built a business model when one did not exist. It's not possible to do justice to all the different dimensions in 40 minutes or whatever time we have. So is there any theme, Anand or Vijay or Sudhir, that I should talk about that is of interest to the team here, to the folks on the call?
Yeah, I think, Nikhil, one of the interesting things about the kind of startups that you did was you did a variety of startups and each of them was in a different domain, right?
Yeah.
So what is the common denominator that takes you across, So it doesn't matter, you are like Elon Musk, right? I can be in space, I can be in EVs and all that kind of stuff. So that is one thing that we want to understand. The second one, obviously, is, you and I interacted very heavily when you were doing ViewClip, right? And, that model when you are trying to do was a very difficult model. Okay, nobody thought that it will go any further because you were dealing with telecom operators and so on, right? And then suddenly you did this pivots and the Singtel, so tell us about that story and how those few pivots actually helped you build it to that scale.
Yeah. No, I think those are great inputs, Sudhir, and I'll go down that path. I think I'll start off by saying something that maybe y'all have all heard enough number of times, which is, though I'm on my fourth startup, I've yet to do a startup where what I started the company to do and what the company eventually became successful doing were the same. Never the same, right? There was a beautiful business plan, wonderful presentation made to investors, and yet, like Sudhir pointed out, it never ended that way. It all ended very well, but not the way we had envisioned upfront, right? And I think that's it's very important that you all become comfortable with that things are going to change, things are not going to be going as per plan, and that's perfectly okay. Right? In fact, embrace it, because you might as well, since it's going to happen. Right? So let me start off with the first question or the first comment that Sudhir made, which is, my first company was a semiconductor chip manufacturing software company. It was my PhD thesis. And frankly, that was the only thing I really understood. I had gone straight from COEP to Berkeley. I'd never ever worked anywhere. And this was during the 95 to 99.com boom period. And it was just the stylish thing to do was to start a company, especially if you were in the Bay Area. And so I also thought, wow, this sounds so cool, this startup thing. So I did it. But I soon realized that I actually didn't know much about what it means to do a startup. The only thing I knew was my PhD thesis, because by definition, you better know that well at least, right? And so I said, hey, this is a very cool technology. How much harder can it be if you build great technology? Of course, the answer was very hard. But it was an example of ignorance was bliss. I did not know what I was getting into, which was a good thing. That's why I got into it. If I knew then what I know now, I would have never done it. Okay, so I got in with my eyes completely shut. I soon realized that things are not as straightforward as they seem. But more importantly, I realized you have to keep pivoting. You have to keep talking to customers, understanding what it is that they care about, not what you care about. I might be able to build an amazing product, but if that's not what the customer needs, it's going to go nowhere. And so my first company, I knew the domain in terms of the technology well, but I knew nothing about how to commercialize it. What does marketing even mean in that context? How do you sell something? Nothing. But the one lesson that I learned from the first company that held me in good stead throughout was, you have to be really, really, really close to who your customers are. Listen to what they have to say. And sometimes they will give you very insightful comments if you are willing to keep a very open mind. But this is easier said than done. Most of us go into a customer presentation or customer meeting, and we're almost like dying for them to say what we want to hear. Okay? And if they don't say what we want to hear, we sort of ignore that. And that I found to be one of the biggest reasons why many startups fail. Right? And so I sort of intuitively, I guess, realized that they know what they're talking about, the customers do. And so if you ask them straightforward questions, you might not get great answers. But if you ask them some more sort of detailed questions, they'll sometimes give you some really, really insightful answers. And so the key is to find those customers who have that ability to think 3 steps ahead. Not all customers do, but some do. Identify them, stay close to them, and if you satisfy them, you're basically going to satisfy all the others. So that is the first thing I got out of my first company. Then I moved to a second company where I was not the entrepreneur. I was not the founder. There was a group of 7 PhDs from MIT, and it was their PhD thesis that they were working on. And I was brought in, this time funnily, I was brought in as the commercial guy, okay, to help them take their PhD thesis and make that into a company. And I found that quite hilarious because in the earlier company, I was the technical guy and I was bringing in commercial people because I didn't know what I was doing. Here, I was the commercial guy helping these PhDs who did not know what they were doing, right? But the difference was I knew nothing about that domain. It was in the chip design, and I knew nothing about chip design. I knew about chip manufacturing and software. I knew nothing about design. And so, of course, the big question was, am I the right person to come in and run that company? And that question was in my mind more than anybody else's. And I soon realized that there are enough smart people in that company from a technology point of view. Okay? But the reason that they were not being successful was not because they were not good technologists. The reason they weren't successful was because they were not listening to the customers. Okay, so here was a group of super smart people who believed that they knew what the customers wanted, and if the customer said something else, their answer was, "Oh, these customers are stupid," right? Which they had seemed to have convinced themselves that was true. And my view was, well, if they're stupid, doesn't matter. They're the ones who want to pay the money. So if they don't think what we are building is meaningful, then we don't have anybody to build this for. And so it took me 6 months to do the following. Number one, I had to learn the basics of that domain so I can have a more intelligent conversation externally and internally, right? And again, learning the basics doesn't mean becoming an expert. Learning the basics means knowing enough to have an intelligent conversation. I was not going to build the next algorithm in that company, but I was going to take whatever algorithm was built, find out what the value of that algorithm was to our customers, be able to explain that to the customers in simple terms, and convince them. Right? And that's where I learned the second lesson. The first lesson I told you was, understand what customers really, really need and identify who the best customers are and ask them. Don't ask every customer. Ask the ones that are truly the sort of the bellwether. Right? The second lesson I learned was, as you get into newer areas, as you build up your company, even if you may be the smartest person because you were the founder, doesn't mean you're going to remain the smartest person, because by definition, you should be bringing in enough smart people into the company, right? If you are the smartest guy in the room, your company is in trouble. Okay. And that is something that I find many entrepreneurs struggle with. They believe that they need to be the smartest person in the room. So they feel like they have to have all the answers. You don't have to have all the answers. Your job is to hire a great salesperson, a great marketing person, a great engineering person who will teach you. If you are teaching them, you have hired the wrong person. Right? This is a very important thing. As entrepreneurs, we cannot be insecure. You are the founder. You are the reason the company exists. Be proud of it. But don't then make it a sense of ego and pride that I also have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't. The most important thing is, as the founder, as the entrepreneur who's trying to scale, you don't have to have all the answers. You have to be the one who asks the right questions. That is the learning to take away. Right? Because if you ask the right questions and you're surrounded by smart people, they'll give you the right answers. But if you ask the wrong question, they will still give you the right answer, but to the wrong question. And your company will go down the wrong path. Right? And so one of the questions that Sudhir posed was, what is common? And what is common is, it does not matter what domain one is in. As you try to scale the company, you have to remember that you have to become really, really good at asking the right questions and surround yourself with smart people who will give the right answers. Because it is theoretically and practically impossible for one person to have all the answers. Right? Even at a place like Apple, however much Steve Jobs was considered a genius, there is no doubt in anybody's mind who worked at Apple who was the true design genius. It was Jonathan Ive. It was not Steve Jobs. Okay. So if a guy like Steve Jobs, who considers himself a design genius, still looked up to somebody who taught him, I think we can all afford to find somebody smarter. Right. So that was the second company. And then the third company was ViewClip, where again, I was the founder, and that was as opposed to the first two companies, which were enterprise B2B plays. This one was a direct to consumer. I had never done direct to consumer before. And it was a very different type of challenge. It was in the mobile space. It was in the video space. It was in the direct to consumer space. I had no experience in any of the three. And yet somehow I thought it was a good idea to start a company in that space. Okay? Entrepreneurs are definitely crazy, if nothing else, right? And so you are all part of that club. So you know, on paper, none of you all should have probably have started this the company you all have started. There are enough. I can give 10 reasons to each of you why the company you have started will fail. Right? Because theoretically, there's always a reason. But practically, then if that was the case, why did YouTube beat Google Video? Right? Why did AdMob, which was in the mobile advertising space, get acquired by Google when Google was the king of advertising? Right? So there are real good reasons to do it. In any case, I started this company in a space that I knew nothing about. And over time, the hypothesis I started off with, I had to change my beliefs in each of those areas, because I kept getting newer and newer data that told me that, sure, maybe that's what you started off with, but that's no longer true. And I'll try and give you more specific examples to bring it to light. I started this company in 2007. Okay. And the idea was to try and create sort of like a Netflix of emerging markets. Okay. That was the hypothesis. Now, today, that seems like a very reasonable thing to do. But in 2007, it was not at all a reasonable thing to do. In fact, enough venture capitalists told me this is one of the stupidest ideas we have heard. Because in 2007, there was no Android, there was no iPhone, there were the old Nokia candy bar phones that many of you have used. There was no 3G, there was no 4G, it was edge networks. Okay, there was no data plan. You could not get 1 gig for 100 rupees like today Jio gives you. That time you were paying 10 rupees for every 10 kilobytes. Okay? So data plans were super expensive. Their mobile networks were super slow, and mobile devices were antiquated. And yet we believe that you could actually deliver video to consumers on a mobile network in markets like India, and that people would pay it, enjoy it, and this business would scale. And of course, the fourth and biggest issue was people in these markets typically don't pay. So how are you going to get them to pay? And so we started off as a technology platform. We said, let's create a ViewClip as a video technology platform anybody can use. And we said, we'll also create a little bit of a direct-to-consumer site just to showcase our technology platform. It was not created to become a direct-to-consumer site. It was to showcase our technology. And we found that people were beginning to sign up to this thing, and we had got the initial early adopters. A few thousand users were using our service, and we were quite happy about it. Okay, but the 1,000 became 2,000 and became 5,000. Still small numbers, but at least people were using it. We soon realized that, okay, but we are not making any money. And the content that we were getting was all from places like YouTube. So what's the big differentiator? We realized that we better get into licensing content. So we went and licensed content from Yash Raj Films and UTV and all these movie studios. But they charge you money for it. So now our expenses went up. Sure, we gave better content to our consumers, but we had no business model. So we said, oh, we need a business model. So then we started working with mobile operators to integrate their payment gateways for the prepaid cards into our service. Okay. So that dealing with mobile operators was one of the most painful experiences of my life. And we did that, over 20 or 30 different countries. Okay. Then we realized that all these content providers were charging us more and more money. We needed to start creating our own content. So we built a small content studio and we started creating our own original shows. Like how Netflix creates shows, we started creating shows, but our shows were in Telugu and Malay and Nigerian and Tagalog and all these different languages, Arabic. And with every passing year, we had to learn something new, a whole new direction to take this company in. And our conclusion was we can't charge $10 a month like Netflix charges if you're going to operate in Africa and India and Southeast Asia. We can charge 2-3 cents, 2-3 rupees a day. And of course, the answer to that was, are you going to build a meaningful business charging 2-3 rupees a day? And so we had to test out that hypothesis and what it takes to do that, and blah, and it just went on and on and on, and we kept tweaking till eventually Android came into the market, iOS came into the market, the 2G became 3G, became 4G. Mobile operators started giving a higher revenue share because they were losing control of their, and so the winds of change started blowing in our direction. And fast forward to today. Today, this service is rebranded as View, VIU. It has about 55 million users across the world. This company is now doing about $140 million in revenue at this, charging 2-3 rupees a day. And it has now overtaken Netflix in most of Southeast Asia. In fact, there was a press release that came out a week back or something like that, that it has beaten Netflix in its subscriber numbers and consumption numbers. So, today nobody is calling it a waste of time or a stupid idea. Today, everybody is telling me how, when you first told us this, we knew this was going to become big. Success has many fathers, as they say, right? So you have to believe what you believe. You have to be willing to be flexible and adapt as the things change. And I'll tell you one point that I think goes back to the point I made earlier regarding staying very close to your customers. For the first 7 years of this company, okay, I had my personal cell phone number listed on our site. And at that point in time, finally, when I took my phone number off the site, we had about 6 or 7 million users across the world. And so I would get phone calls on my cell phone number from across the world at random times of the day or night. Okay? Half the time it was not a language I understood. Okay? But nobody calls you on customer service because they want to tell you how happy they are. Right? They are calling you because they're upset about something. And so even though I might not have understood the language, I definitely understood with the 3 or 4 English terms they use, like search and something. I knew what was not working, right? And then I would send them a link and I would say, please click on this link. And then I'll get your device ID and then we'll figure out what the issue is. And it was one of the most valuable things I could ever do, because I could have always put some junior person's phone number and then they would have spoken and they would have said, I don't understand what they're saying. And it would all got lost by the time it came to me. I viewed myself as I want to stay focused on the product. For that, I need to understand what the customer is saying, what the consumers are saying. And for that, I need to be directly connected, not second hand, third hand through 5 people. And that is another example of staying close to, your customers in whatever the context may be for you, right? And so that was that company, and each of them ended up being very, very successful. They all had very big exits and all of that. But I then went to the 4th one, which is the one I'm at right now, which is a molecular diagnostics company, which is, of course, now everybody understands this space because that's what you use to do your COVID testing, right? You've all heard the term RT-PCR. RT-PCR is a piece of equipment that's an example of molecular diagnostics or molecular testing. But this is a company that actually I'm not the founder of. It was started by my friend, who we were classmates from 3rd standard in Pune together. Okay, and so we've known each other for more than 40 years. And this was his PhD thesis. He came to the US, did his PhD at Michigan, and moved back to India 10 years back. And his goal was, how do we take this advanced stuff like molecular diagnostics so that we can diagnose cancers, infectious diseases, and genetic disorders like alpha thalassemia and all of that, Down syndrome, very, very cost effectively for markets like India. And he started this 10 years back, but it was way ahead of its time. And so for 10 years, 9 out of the 10 years, it was struggling. They didn't know what to do with it. It was very cool work, but nobody was actually taking it up. No doctors, no hospitals. And then about 3-4 years back, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I started spending a lot of time with her in Pune. And I realized that the quality of healthcare in India, quality of healthcare even in the US is bad. But in India, it's quite very bad. And stuff like cancer should be treated in a very personalized manner, which is how it's treated in the US. But in India, if 20 women have breast cancer, all 20 women will be given the exact same treatment. In the US, if 20 women have breast cancer, you will do a genetic test of their tumor, and then each of them will get a different treatment. And because of that, the 5-year survival rate of people who have breast cancer in India is 60%, which means 60% of the people who are diagnosed with breast cancer, 5 years later are still alive, 40% die. In the US, because it's personalized, 90% of the people who are diagnosed with breast cancer are still alive. To me, that's just 30% of lives in India are lost for something that can be managed. It is already being managed, right? But it's too expensive, or people are not aware of it. And the whole point of this company, GenePath, was how do we make all of this cost effective and accessible to emerging markets, to markets like India. When my mom was diagnosed, I went to this friend of mine who was running GenePath, and I told him, hey, can you help? Because I don't even know what questions to ask the doctor. He got involved. He was super helpful. But because I got him involved a little too late, my mom still passed away. And to me, that was a very big sort of very important inflection point in my life, because I was thought to myself, I did all these startups, but when it mattered to my mom, I could do nothing. And so my mom had told me before she passed away that this friend of yours really helped me a lot. He really tried his best. And I hope others can benefit and don't have to go through what I went through. So please help him in whatever way you can. And this friend of mine had always told me for many years, come join me. And I was to keep telling me, I know nothing about this space. Find somebody who does. But after my mom passed away, I said, you know what? I still know nothing about the space, but I'll figure it out. I don't have to be the expert. Like I said earlier, right? He is the expert. I have to ask the right questions. He has the answers. And so I joined him about 2 years back. And I'll just tell you one interesting data point. 15 days after my mom passed away, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. But this time, because I was already in the company, I started learning more about what my dad was going through. And about 6 months after that, my dad and his doctor were both convinced that he had 1 month to live. And I told him, I don't believe that's the case. I said, now that I know the space, now that I'm surrounded by all these super smart people, I believe what you're going through is a very different issue. You are going downhill not because of the cancer. You're going downhill because of the different medications you're taking, one for blood pressure, one for cancer, and they are interacting with each other. I learned all of this because of this company, right? I decided to test this hypothesis on him because he was convinced he was going to die in less than a month, and his doctor was convinced he was going to die in less than a month. Okay? I did the genetic study on him. we figured out which medicines were sort of cross interacting, and 30 days after we made that change, when he was convinced he was gone, and so was his doctor. I was in the US. I was doing all of this from the US for him. He called me, and I was like, okay, I'm really keen to hear what he is. And when he called me from his phone, and there was his video was on, but his video was very blurry and I couldn't make out. So I told him, turn off the video. He said, no, I don't want to turn the video off. I want to. So he took somebody else's phone. It was a satellite phone, and the video worked much better. And what I saw in the video was him jumping into water. And I was like, there is no water around my house. Where is he jumping in? It turns out that for a man who was on his deathbed, he was in the middle of the Antarctic, jumping into the water, because he had recovered to the point where he felt healthy enough to travel all the way. And he said, I got a second lease on life. I want to enjoy it. That story now is almost 1.5 years old. He's living, he still has stage 4 cancer. That's not going away. But he's living as normal a life, all because his medication was interacting, not because of the cancer, right? And so, like I said, the issue is not whether we have to be smart enough to have all the answers. Can we ask the right questions? Can we commit to whatever we are doing? And then, you know, good things typically happen. I can go on and on, but I know I've already spent 30 minutes or so. I would be happy to answer questions if there are any.
We would love to keep hearing you.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Means, as I was listening to Nikhil, I was myself entrepreneur a few years back. I said, when I was entrepreneur, where was this guy? I could have learned from him. I could have learned from him. Nikhil, just one question I want to ask you, that when you are working on your view clip, had you sort of plotted that in the future you are going to get smartphones, or you're going to get 3G, 4G, and you are going to have the better technology so that your platform will work better and will be more affordable?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Anand. There were certain things we believed were going to happen. We believed, we said, look, it's only a matter of time before India goes down the same path that the US has gone, right? If the US has more smartphones, sure, there'll be cheaper version. They won't be as expensive, but they'll happen. If the US can go to 3G and 4G, sure, it'll have different economics, but it'll happen. So certain things we had charted, because if we could not chart that, or if we could not predict that would happen, then it was no point going in, right? Our view was, let's go in before, when others still think it's not going to happen, right? Because startups don't win because they are smarter than others. Startups win because they are willing to take a bet before others are. And sometimes those bets won't pay off, right? Because the market doesn't develop. But if today I decide, I want to get into mobile advertising, there is nothing I can do to beat Google. They can hire 100 times more people who are as smart or smarter than the people I can hire, right? And so we said, look, today nobody sees this happening, right? We see it happening. Now, maybe we are wrong, but if we don't start now, we have no chance to build a differentiation. The worst that can happen is we are wrong. Okay, startups fail. But if we are right, then by the time others realize, oh my God, this is a big market, we should already have a presence, right? So certain things we predicted, certain things, like I could not predict 14 years back that we would get into the original content creation business. I could not predict 14 years back I would have to work with mobile operators. I thought we'll find other ways to monetize. I thought advertising would be the way to monetize. But I soon realized that that is not going to be enough. So certain hypotheses we had, which turned out right, and they were important for them to turn out right. Certain hypotheses we did not get right, but it was okay because we could pivot and find some other hypothesis that was still okay. But if we were wrong about the networks being better and the devices being better, then nothing would have saved us.
Can you tell them a little more about your the investors that came into ViewClip, like Singtel Innovation, and how that helped, and how could you convince Singtel to fund the company, and how that sort of changed things for you?
Yeah, no, actually, that also, there's a lot of very useful learnings from that. So when I started, the first investor I got was a US venture capitalist called NEA. Then the second one was also a US investor, but they had a Japanese presence. And I was always curious about how we would move into Europe. And Japan was always considered sort of leading edge when it came to mobile. The third round investor we got was an Indonesian investor, because by then we realized that Indonesia and those markets were becoming big for us, and I wanted someone who could help us understand that market. The fourth round was from Singtel, Singapore Telecom, who, though Singapore in itself is a small market, Singtel as a company has ownership in Airtel, in the biggest operator in Indonesia, in the biggest operator in Philippines, in the biggest operator in Thailand, and so on. And so they were a very strategic investor. And for them, they wanted to invest because by the time we did the fourth round, everyone in the world realized that this space is going to be hot. And this is the point I was making earlier, right? If we had started the company when we did our Series D, it would be too late. But because by the time the world and people like Singtel realized that this is a hot space, we already had built certain assets. We were valuable to them, right? So they invested. And then the final round we did was with a Hong Kong investor. And the unique part about this Hong Kong investor was that they were not only a mobile operator, which was an important stakeholder for us, but more importantly, they were in the content business, in the cable TV business, and so we did not have any investor until that point in time who understood the content space or had relationships there. And we got them in, and eventually we had to sort of engineer one of the most interesting deals I've ever had to engineer, which is I got this Hong Kong investor to come in and buy out all our previous investors, because soon we had just so many investors, and having too many investors also is a pain to deal with. And I said, look, the previous investors, they can't actually add value today, because the US investor does not know how India works or how Indonesia works, but they do want a return. And so I had to engineer a deal where the Hong Kong investor was willing to pay a high enough price to buy out the previous investors so that the previous investors got a good return, but not too high a price where they don't have any upside. Because of course they invested so that eventually that this company can become even more successful. And today this company has filed to go public, and so this Hong Kong investor will also see very good returns. But trying to keep so many different stakeholders happy is often a challenge, right? But yeah, it goes back to the point that if you keep building value and you have taken the bets early, when you are successful, you can be truly successful. Yeah.
Here, Vivek Damle here. Nikhil, great story, very motivational.
Thank you.
I just want to get your perspective on holistic personalized therapy, not just for cancer, for any other ailment that what you think about this.
Yeah, that's a 45-minute session in itself, Vivek. I mean, I'll tell you just a quick snapshot. I went through a very interesting experience. About 10 years back, I was, all South Asians, all of us are South Asians, Indians, we all have a high risk of heart disease and diabetes and all of these things. But like most human beings, I never thought it applied to me. Okay? And I believe I had good reason. I'm 6 feet tall. I'm 145 pounds, so I'm not heavy at all, right? I'm on the lighter side. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I play competitive soccer even today. I don't even drink tea or coffee. So, hey, on paper, I sound amazing. Except I still went, because once you turn 40, you're supposed to go do one of these checkups for your heart. I went, and I was told I was at the 98th percentile of calcification of my arteries. And I was told, in the cardiologist's word, in his own words, you're a walking time bomb. You're the type of person we read about in the newspaper who goes out, plays a game of soccer, comes back and goes in his sleep. Now, that's a very chilling thing to hear just when you have turned 40. You don't think about your mortality, right? And I started thinking to myself, what did I do wrong? I thought I did everything correct. Right? It soon turned out that, well, what does correct mean? And this is where this holistic thing comes in, right? You better have, you better eat well. And we don't know what eating well really means. And we, in fact, at GenePath, we've created a whole program around how each person reacts to food differently. And so how you can put on sensors to see how food affects you differently. But food is a very important element, but one element. Then, of course, there is exercise. And exercise has aerobic, like, all the cardio stuff you do, all the strength training, yoga, stretching. That's a whole body in itself. There is sleep, right? And there are ways to measure sleep. And so, there you have to look at impact of all three on all your markers, whether it's your blood pressure, your blood sugar, your heart rate. And over 3 years, last 3 years, if you look at me, you will see every possible sensor on me. I have a Aura ring, a Fitbit, a Apple Watch, a Whoop band, a blood pressure monitor, a continuous glucose monitor, a heart rate monitor. I have everything. And I monitor everything I eat, and I found correlations. Okay. And it's amazing how personalized this affects each of us. If you ate rice and dal and bhendi bhaji, and I ate the same thing, our blood pressure, our blood sugar will spike very differently, right? If you eat dark chocolate and I eat dark chocolate, it will have very different. So, but if you go and ask somebody, what's healthy food? You'll typically get some very vague answer, which is not actually accurate. And so to me, what I view holistic as is something where each of us owes it to ourselves to understand what different things do to our body and then follow it. In the spirit of being entrepreneurial, sometimes we get carried away and we don't take charge of our health. And then some of us don't get to live beyond 40 and 45. And it's not like, oh, it happens to 1% of the people. It happens to enough people. And we always believe it happens to others. It doesn't happen to others. It happens to us. And so just take that small amount of rest. Go for that 15-minute walk. None of us are that busy that we can't think when we are going for a 15-minute walk, right? When I was 25, if somebody had told me this, I would have said, sure, but not for me. I wish there was a way I could convince my 25-year-old version to take this seriously. But, we all are stupid and make mistakes when we are young, but hopefully we can learn from other people's mistakes.
Great answer. Just one comment. Have you heard of a company called Grail Bio by Jeff Huber?
Yeah.
Okay. So he has an interesting story as well. So
yeah,
just wanted to share. If people want to look at his story, it's amazing too.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Real pleasure, Nikhil. Keep it up. Thanks.
Nikhil, just one thing. I'm working with Ahar Kranti, and I think I would like them to listen to you also about this different monitors that you're using for the same food and how it gives the different actions.
Sure. And for those of you in Pune, if you all want to check it out, just go to geneclinics.com. It's GeneClinics. So geneclinics.com. And, it's a very interesting program. It basically helps you look at your own data and figure out your own conclusions. And then we add a couple of dietitians, coaches, and geneticists who can help you interpret that data if you need it. But all of you are smart enough to, be able to make a lot of sense. You just need to know. That's all.
Sudhir, will you do honors of saying thanks?
Oh, absolutely. Hey, Nikhil, I think Nikhil's wife is Gujarati, but she speaks better Marathi than Nikhil does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She's also from Pune, by the way. She's also
also COAP.
She's also COAP alumnus.
Correct. Yeah. Nikhil, thank you very much for sharing your story. It's always a pleasure listening to you. And I think your story was very inspiring. I think, this is what is really important. We can tell them about all the models, but, the practical, when the rubber hits the road, what really happens and how you figure your way out of it. That's the entrepreneur's challenge. So I think, thank you so much for being here and spending your time with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nikhil. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it, and I have put the URL, and somebody has also put it. So if you all want it, take a look at it. But thank you. It was fun, and good luck to all of you.
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Thank you, Nikhil.